Hi, here we are with my emotional support dragon, which is coincidentally what Rand is during the first episodes of The Wheel of Time, of the new season. And I like this for him, I like it quite a lot. I like him as a carer, as someone who is there for the people who are maybe not in the best position in life. I like the gesture of giving attention and money to whoever needs them. And also I'm very much for it in the sense that it's quite masochistic of him, the kind of exposure to what he expects to become. And I think it's very much in character, and yeah, I like this for him. I didn't figure out where this part of the story was going for a while, mainly I suppose because I had my book-based preconceptions as where Logain should be. But I like that Rand has some time to spend with him, and I like that we get to spend some time with him. I think it's one of the best performances in the season, in the whole series. I'm not a huge fan of the dialogue and the whole plot relating to Logain. It doesn't feel fully developed, doesn't feel like it's the best that it could be. But I like having him as part of the story. I hope that it gets better. There are some plot holes, I suppose, already visible in what's happening, but I'm trying to overlook them. This video will not include spoilers until the final few minutes when I warn about them. I reread the books probably a month ago, but I'll try not to stick to them that much. But they're fairly fresh in my mind, so some of the things will stick out. The first season didn't go so well, I think we can all agree on that. There are some parts of the story there that will definitely cause inconsistencies or will be swept under the rug as much as possible. I expect the second one. But I am nevertheless excited. I like seeing the story come to life in this incarnation. It's been part of my life for way too long, and I'm looking forward to seeing the bits of it that click, because there were bits of it like that in the first season, and I'm hoping for the second one as well. One of my first observations is that maybe some of the peculiarities of the characters get stripped from them, some distinctions get lost somewhere along the way, and it's not just characters, actually, it's the culture as well, the different countries. There's a lot of world building in The Wheel of Time, a lot of detail has been put into it, and I miss seeing some of it in the show. I talked about this before, like for example, the Shienaran funeral we see in season 2. It's pretty much the same in terms of ritual and the same in terms of shots as well. It's a shot from above at graves dug in a circle of bodies wrapped in cloth. It's absolutely the same thing we see in season 1 after the battle to free Logain. In the books we don't get details about every aspect of every culture, but we get some. And the Shienaran burial rites are somewhat well explained. They include burying the dead unclothed, and that's what it means. May the last embrace of the mother welcome you home. It means returning to the ground. So, I don't know, it would not have made the best visual to follow this description, I admit that, but still I feel like giving different people in different circumstances the exact same burial scene is a bit odd, and I miss having some of the richness of culture from the books. And also, those were very shallow graves, they seem almost pointless. But I did like the detail of Elias burying the dog or wolf. As for Kyrian, the foregate I think clicks to an extent. I like the nods to certain scenes from the books. I'm not sure if we'll see them, the climax of them at least. Maybe we will, maybe we won't. But I like that there's this nod to them at least. As for the Nobleman Party, that it was halfway there for me. I like this sort of Marie Antoinette vibe it gets. It communicates very quickly the whole idea of how important power and position is in this culture and how irrelevant everyone who doesn't have them is considered. I perhaps wish they had based the costumes a little bit more on the source material, because right now it looks just very French. And there are some very interesting visual cues from the source material, from the books, that give indication for power, for alliances, etc. So it would have been interesting to see some kind of interpretation of that. But nevertheless, I like this, and I cheered when I saw Lindsay Duncan. I'm not a huge fan of how the Hunt of the Horn is portrayed. Admittedly, the show doesn't paint a picture of a world where something like a noble adventurer is a likely occupation. However, in the books, this is a very important magical object and it's one of the most famous legends, so the hunt for it, I don't know, I expected maybe a little bit more fanfare or a little bit more Raiders of the Lost Ark vibe, something like it. Not something that only the most desperate peasants engage in, and only out of desperation and only out of being manipulated for it. It was great seeing more of the tower. I liked seeing the design come to life, but I think a lot of the choices have been made for the visual aspect of it rather than logically, like having those huge carved doors for the Stark novice quarters lacking any other kind of decoration. But I understand it, since we have a lot of scenes of people standing by doors and knocking on doors in the first few episodes. The randomness and awkwardness of the teaching process is something I can't get on board with. It's supposed to be challenging both in terms of learning to control the magic and developing character, etc. But it just feels messy, it feels chaotic, both the scene in the kitchen and as well as the scene after that with the misunderstanding. Aes Sedai are supposed to be able to talk circles around you, to be able to say lots of words without conveying any significant meaning. However, I don't think this should apply to the teaching process, and that's exactly what Alana's lesson sounded to me, like saying words with very little meaning. It just rang hollow. Liandrin is a top-notch villainous presence. I like that for her, and I like giving her a bit of backstory to provide the sort of connection with Nynaeve that's building up, but it still feels a bit much for me that we are seeing her being able to pull the strings of so many characters that otherwise wouldn't have let her in their head so easily. Min, Mat and Nynaeve are all characters who have a very serious trust issues regarding the Aes Sedai, and it's a bit much for me to see all of them under her thumb. Seeing all of them being manipulated by her, yes, it paints her as a very terrifying puppeteer, but it is a bit much for me. The teaching moment between Liandrin and Nynaeve, when she tries to push her to overcome her boundaries, was a bit of a flashback for me for something like Netflix Winx Club or something like that. The whole concept of channeling negative emotions for magic, it could be very cliche and very overused, In the books, Nynaeve's block doesn't come across that cliche at all. Actually, some of my favorite moments are scenes that are related to her block and overcoming it. It's framed differently somehow, and even though this scene with Liandrin is an almost exact replica of a scene between Nynaeve and another character in the books, it somehow feels a lot more cliche. It doesn't sit well with me to see Nynaeve so much into sword fighting with the warders. I appreciate that the world of Robert Jordan in the books has this tendency a little bit to create this impression that men and women are almost a different species that don't mix well. So it's good that the show tries to create some kind of overlap this early in the series. There are characters that bridge the gap later on, definitely, and much more successfully, I think. But I suppose the show wanted to start it earlier. This particular example doesn't sit too well with me because I have very vivid memories, very vivid scenes in my head of Nynaeve's reaction to seeing wounded people, and somehow her wielding a sword seems like a serious contradiction to that. But I guess if I forget this, it's kind of enjoyable to see her have some kind of relationship there. I like the Count of Monte Cristo vibe of Mat and Min's meeting, and I love the detail where Mat mimes exactly what Liandrin does as she locks him up. It's a very cool visual for me. I think Book Mat is the one that I least of all would have expected to allow so much influence and to allow Liandrin to get in his head so much, but in the context of the show, I think this maybe is the most reasonable and justified example. After all, we see him dealing with a lot of guilt and the general oppressiveness of being captive for months on end. So yeah, it makes sense in the context of the show. Donald Finn, I think, has potential to be great at being Mat, maybe even better at what Mat is supposed to evolve as a character. And yeah, I'm holding my fingers crossed for this, even though almost half the season's passed and we've seen very little of Mat. I really hoped for one of his most defining scenes from the books, one of his first point of view chapters, and I really hope we would see a particular scene there. I think everyone who's read the books knows what I'm talking about. And maybe there will be time at some point, I don't know. But yeah, it makes me sad a little bit how his stories turned out. The way Liandrin manipulates him using the letters gives me major throwback to how Dobby is trying to convince Harry not to go back to Hogwarts because his friends have forgotten him. But Harry was 12. I'm not happy with how Unos turned out in the show as well. The scene in the third episode is definitely impactful and creates a visceral response, yes. But I think the way they build him up as a character is fairly disappointing. I quite enjoy Book Uno, so yeah, I'm sad a bit for that. I mean, spitting in the face of the enemy is up his alley, yeah, but I think he was supposed to have a lot more sense than that. In the books, yes, he is a bit of a comic relief character, and you grin when you read his parts, but that's because he's colorful and expressive, and not because people make fun of him. To his back or to his face, it feels at least low-key malicious and kind of eats away at the idea of the Shannarans as these powerful warriors, which is unfortunately something we saw as well in the first season, when the whole male Shannaran army was destroyed by an enemy who was in turn eviscerated by a handful of women. I don't know, it creates for me, a little bit of uncomfortable situation. Even Lan's swordsmanship suffers, I think. On one hand, I quite like the hint that maybe not having the bond weakens him. We see Moiraine, who for the past 20 plus years has had the power as her one and only main weapon, and she has no background in sword fighting, but she manages to kill Murderau with one stab. Yes, she tricks him, which I like. It's better than having some kind of open confrontation, but still it creates a power imbalance, I think, to see her succeed in this and then see Lan fail at his fight so easily, despite the aerial acrobatics. And on the other hand, Moiraine now should need Lan more than ever, I think. And whatever she is brave, yes, in the books as well as in the show, but she's never been stupid, and she shouldn't be. And knowing what we know, that she was aware that Murderau followed Beldamon to her and they could be in the vicinity, leaving alone in the night in those circumstances feels pretty up there in the stupid scale. I get that him being so frustrated with the secret she keeps creates this kind of suspense and adds gravity to the secret she's keeping, but I think it could be communicated better. I feel like there might be a better way instead of just destroying this relationship. On the other hand, I quite like bartering with Beldamon, the whole scene. I like seeing Moiraine excel in that kind of situation. It seems more like her thing, more the thing that I would expect to see from her. And I like the character that it paints, the way that she bargains for what she wants to get it for as little money as possible, but also gives money away freely to take care of the people who have come to her. So yeah, I like this as part of her character and as part of her skill set. But I had a point when I talked about Lan and Moiraine and the skills they show. I don't see why we have to carbon copy skills all across the board. Why should every woman be skilled in physical combat? And why should every channeler be amazing at healing? Nynaeve outdid anything expected of her, but at least it was her own predisposition, while Egwene's healing miracle was entirely unjustified. And we see a lot of other Aes Sedai and even unaccepted doing it, and we have yet to establish levels to this skill, to establish that it's not universal and there's more difference to it than just raw power. There are different kinds of strengths in skill and in character. We don't have to have characters who do just one thing. We don't have to have one-note characters. But having everyone have everything and every woman be skilled at everything, I think is a bit much, and we have more variety to lean into in the source material. More than that, I think. And don't get me wrong, I don't mind at all seeing female characters in roles that used to be less popular, let's say. Even as a child, I remember rejoicing in seeing scenes with powerful and temperamental female characters that are less the image of a damsel in distress. I have a vivid, almost photographic memory of a page in a book, some story about Robin Hood, where Maid Marian is having an argument with somebody, making a point that she will do what she wants to do no matter what they do. And in this case it was running away with Robin, I think. Something like that. I obviously don't remember neither the book exactly nor the story, but I remember loving seeing the strength. So I'm not here to say that we should shove the female characters back into that girly girl box. I just think we have more variety to lean into in the source material instead of just
giving everyone everything. My point is, Robert Jordan has created some impressive, badass female characters with their unique strengths. Some are actually amazing fighters, some have other skill sets. And it feels to me like if a skill is in everybody's arsenal, it decreases in value. If with minimal or no preparation at all, anyone can heal anything, or anyone can defeat a monster, then why would we be impressed when that happens next time? I like random quirks, I like odd skills and odd failings. I like, for example, the fact that Elaine is the unlikely best at sewing, and I like that Nynaeve is the one that hates washing dishes even more than the daughter heir, even though she's been doing it her whole life. I like that Matt is skilled with horses, and that's something we dismissed with in a very unfortunate way in the first season. Later on in the series, in the books at least, the characters develop their own magical or otherwise skills, and there's something specific for each of them. Even if they are minor characters, there's some kind of specificity, something that's their own. And I wish we saw a bit more of that. Maureen's journey now is giving me some of that depth of character I'm looking for, because it emphasizes her weakness and it shows some other failings and skills that she has. And even visually, in the first scene in the tub, the lens used to show her when she's looking at her hands is such that it makes her hands look even smaller, like abnormally small for her body. It makes all of it feel wrong, and in the scene with the murder house, seeing the weaves originate so close to her is also something that is very cool, very powerful kind of image. But also I have a thought on this in the spoiler part of the video later on. The process of carrying water, I think, is humbling, and I think that's a shift in perspective she needs, though I don't think we see it demonstrated as in taking effect yet. But I like the concept of this humbling shift more in theory than in practice. In practice, I feel like she would definitely have better things to do. Perrin's story is a bit of a jumble in those first episodes, but I like some parts of it. I definitely like the letter, the tone of it, the warmth and softness it contains, the way it shows his character, and also this kind of simple wisdom in the way he's phrasing certain things. I like this for him as a way to translate the book character into the film. However, this regular post, in those circumstances, those 12 letters Liandrin says he sent, it feels a bit unlikely in the circumstances, considering that he's supposed to be chasing someone who is trying to avoid notice, to kill everyone in their way. Finding 12 places to send those letters from, and at the same time be so on time for Beltane, it feels a bit unlikely, but at least there's no implication that he's getting any post back, because that would have snapped me right out of the story immediately. So yeah, post of circumstances are a bit unlikely. And also I feel like there should have been more urgency to this chase. We get some kind of implication for the danger of it, the warning to be careful, etc., but not the urgency. I would have expected more the vibe of Aragorn, Legolas and Gimli chasing after the Uruk-hai. And instead we get chill rides and letter writing and mocking conversations, so not much rush to it. If I am being unreasonably doubtful of the fantasy postal services, by all means give me your suggestions in the comments, I'd love to know. The Seanchan, oh man, I've been avoiding talking about that. I think I really hate them. They creep me out, always have. And in that sense, I think the show is doing a pretty good job of making them very unpleasant. everything about them, attacking at night, taking the girls and women with no explanation, using the one power as a weapon, the terrible psychology of picking that one strongest personality in the group of captives to use him as an example. It's all pretty horrifying. So yeah, that's working out pretty well. That being said though, showing their leader in the meeting of the Dark Friends earlier, as well as the Forsaken openly at their leadership, is something that I'm not quite on board with. It's a bit on an obvious side, showing that, yeah, they are evil. Here are a million reasons for that. It makes me think about the root of evil in stories and the way that sometimes it kind of all goes to the same source, which doesn't have to be the case. Not every antagonist has to be a dark friend. In the books there are certain antagonists that I respect and that I understand, and their reasons may have been influenced or manipulated by the dark, but they are not directly streaming from there. They're not directly a dark friend themselves. So in that aspect, I don't know, I feel like not every antagonist we have on the show has to be directly connected to the dark side. They are pretty horrible. I think we would have hated them enough even without them being dark friends. This video is getting very long indeed, so I'll be doing a part 2 with Nynaeve's trials and Rand and Selene, Elaine, Min's vision, and everything else I think deserves a mention. Now, quickly, some spoilery thoughts I had. I'd love to know your thoughts on those. Moiraine seeing the weaves as someone else is channeling during the fight with the murderer, I think implies that it's more likely that she's shielded and the shield is tied off. And yeah, I think if she dies, maybe she'll regain her powers or something like that. Or maybe the writers just wanted her to have this cruel, painful scene and damn the implications. What do you think? Egwene's refusal to use her hands during channeling is something that annoys me quite a bit, because it's something that she has no reason to suspect is possible at this point. We as viewers have seen a bit of that. Like Logain, for example, I think he had minimal hand gestures connected to channeling, but Egwene hasn't seen that. Egwene has no reason for this, and even though she apparently really wants to exceed in this, she's putting some baseless hindrances in her own way. It doesn't make sense, just so that the writers can put this "I didn't come here for easy" line in. I personally like "I have enough character" much better. And by the way, that scene about the threesomes, if we get the threesome with Galad and Gawyn, I would not be at all surprised. And I like the aspect of Egwene looking significantly at the Amyrlin's dress. In the context of the show, maybe it can be translated mainly as thinking about her, wondering where she is, etc. But there was a certain aspect to it, a small smile, a way she looked at it that made it seem like ambition shining through, like this is Egwene thinking, yeah, I want to be that someday. Selene, I think, is translating fairly well. She's missing her signature white, but that's understandable considering she's posing as someone who lives in the Foregate. In that context, I think her costume, these dark blues with the white decorations, which also reference the night sky, is a pretty cool way to spin it. However, Perrin seeing somebody in the window in one of the first episodes, I think that's a pretty useless observation, and it means nothing in this context. In the books, that's Selene following him and Rand before she meets Rand in the What If worlds. And in this case, it means nothing. I think up until episode 3, Perrin's powers have suffered greatly in translation. I'll admit that telepathy and smell are not the easiest powers to translate into a visual medium. However, those visions don't make sense to me as wolf powers. Some kind of reconstruction, maybe, yes, but not to this extent. I think the writers just wanted to involve the fly scene and the scene of the dead murderer because they are very impactful. And yeah, but they don't make sense as part of Perrin's powers, I think. But I am very much looking forward to seeing any kind of wolf communication. I think there's endless potential there. Fingers crossed and see you soon.